website design, so how sort of practitioners, businesses, organisations go ahead and design sort of for mobile, which is obviously a big thing now. There's something like 25% of people visiting websites on mobiles and tablets and things like that. The second presentation is going to be more about processes, which is very important today. So when you guys sort of graduate, some of you probably already have work experience and have done some freelance and stuff like that, but getting your processes right is obviously key. So the second presentation will be about agile, user-centered design, lean, continuing development, and various other processes. So the second presentation is something I'm going to present on Friday at a big conference about user-centered design, where people are paying a lot of money. So you guys are privileged over here. And the first one is something I presented at Apps World, which was a big, one of the biggest European app conferences this year. So I'll start with the first one. So if you guys are designing websites at the moment, you know, whether here at university projects or sort of freelance projects, you're planning to get jobs as, you know, whether it's game designers, UI designers, interaction designers, whatever you're going to do, when you start getting into that sort of field, you have to think about, you know, designing, not only designing for the desktop, but designing for the tablets and the mobiles. So we're going to explore some options that you guys can have. And obviously a mobile strategy is more than just making a website work on a phone or on a tablet. There's a lot more that needs to be done in that space, as we'll see in some examples soon. So first of all, about me. So I founded Cyberduck in 2005 after sort of my background as an interactive media, or designing for interactive media. So graduated from Middlesex University in 2003. Spent a couple of years doing freelance and working for other agencies, and then decided to set up Cyberduck. Yeah. And then decided to set up Cyberduck in 2005. So we've got an office in Hertfordshire, a place called Elstree. We've got over 25 people in our office, mainly all of them sort of pretty hands-on like I am, designers, developers, marketing, these sort of people. So why are apps very, very important? Basically, as we can see in this example here, when I say apps, I'm talking about mobile websites. You know, lots of companies out there are going away and producing native apps that you can download from the App Store, Google Play. You guys have probably got lots of them on your phones and iPads and things like that. But as we can see in this example, if you go onto Chanel's website on your iPhone or Android or whatever device you have, you'll find that the website doesn't work on a phone. Why? That's obviously a problem, because lots of people still use their phones to visit websites. If you look at Facebook as an example, there's more people coming onto Facebook on sort of through the browser or through the phones or tablets browser than there is from, let's say, native apps. So obviously some of you might have the native app for Facebook or the native app for Facebook for the Android. But the reality is most users who come from the mobile web, they actually use a web browser. So lots of companies are spending a lot of money on developing native apps, but they're completely neglecting the mobile web browser. And obviously that's a mistake. Obviously Facebook have done a wonderful job with their mobile websites. If you go into www.facebook.com from your phone, you'll have a pretty consistent user experience from the browser to the apps. Other examples are, well, we'll show you some other examples. So why is the mobile web key? Lots of people, or sort of users or customers, they don't actually download apps in the first place. So if you don't give them a mobile website, then they're not going to interact with the brand or with the service in the first place. Mobile browser usage is increasing and increasing, as you can see here. Half of all smartphone owners, when I say smartphones, I'm talking about iPhones and Androids and things like that, they search on their phone every day. So every day these people are going onto Google on their phones and doing a search. A lot of apps that are being downloaded from the App Store and iTunes and Google Play, they're only being used once or twice. So lots of people have got lots of apps and they just don't use the apps, they'll just go into the web browser. The other good thing about creating mobile websites is there's no commission to pay, so you don't have to pay money to if you're a developer. So let's say you've got an app and you're offering some sort of book book to view, or some sort of service or game. Let's say you're developing a game, you have to give, I think it's around 20 to 30% of your profits have to go to Apple or Google. Whereas if you develop it in the browser, you can do what you want, and you can just use a PayPal or a credit card, and the commissions are much lower. So that's another reason why the mobile web is key. The other thing that you can't do with native apps is you can't link from Google to a native app. You can tell people to go to an app store and do a search. So let's say if your game is called, I don't know, the LCC game, you can't actually have a link from Google to the game. People have to physically go into the app store and search for your app, which is obviously not ideal. And the other good thing about mobile websites is you can actually make it behave like an app. Unless you're sort of creating a really complicated 3D game, with most HTML5 functions now, you can make it behave like a native app within the browser. Of course, there are some issues there with sort of offline usage, but even there's various things that you can do. So what mobile, if you do want to develop a mobile app for the web, what strategies are there? So you've got, the first strategy is to do nothing. So you just create a website and just leave it as it is and just hope that it works on phones. So as you can see in this example here with Subaru, which is a Japanese car company. So they've developed a website, and if you go on your phone, you have to pinch and zoom, and as you can see, it's quite small and quite, if you browse through a lot of pages, it starts to get irritating. So the first strategy is just to do nothing. The second strategy is something called responsive web design, which is very popular now. So it's we call it RWD, but you can call it responsive web design, where the browser scales and moves around, and the URL or the website address stays the same. The user interface tends to change, so it will go from a sort of a horizontal menu to a vertical drop-down menu. The content pretty much stays the same as well, and obviously so the content would move from 3 or 4 columns to 2 columns on, say, a tablet, and then onto 1 column for a phone. So it's a very clever way of doing things, but however, you'd be surprised, not many people are doing this at the moment. So for you guys, this is a big opportunity, when you're out there looking for a job or something like that. If you know the principles of responsive web design, it's a very demanded service from businesses at the moment. The other strategy that you can use is something called adaptive web design, and it's also called mobile website design, because you're actually designing and creating 2 to 3 separate websites. You create one website for desktops and laptops, and then another website for phones or tablets. So that's an interesting approach. And if you go on to like the BBC, BBC are very big at having totally separate websites for smartphones and a separate one for the desktop. And within those websites, you've then got responsive layouts as well, which is clever. So they're in a way combining both of the strategies together. And this is where I'm going to talk a bit more. So basically, you can combine responsive web design with adaptive web design using things like JavaScript feature detection. You can adapt the user interface accordingly. You can hide certain elements, and a lot of people are going for the combo approach, because if you think about designing a mobile website, you've got different screen sizes for Androids and iPhones. So making the layout and the interface respond definitely makes sense. You can also hide certain things as well. So, for example, if you want to hide a video for mobile users, you can do that as well. Again, it makes sense. And And then the other way you can do things is, so what I just spoke about now is having a responsive website with adapting some of the elements, whereas you can also have an adaptive website where it responds similar to LinkedIn. So if you go into LinkedIn on your phones through the browser, you'll see that there's some responsiveness in there as well. So, and BBC is another example. So what is the way forward? You design for the mobile first and don't discriminate against the mobile web. So when someone approaches you and says, hey, I've got this brilliant app idea, I want to create a native app, that's great, but don't forget the mobile web as well, because the reality is 50 to 60% of people will probably go onto the web browser first to try and find some sort of user experience, and if they don't, then you've locked them out. Obviously, in terms of user experience, you can use things like ethnography to find out what users want, and I'll talk a bit more about that in my next presentation. Adaptive web design can offer a better user experience because you're really creating two different websites, and sometimes even three, so you can totally do what you want. Whereas with responsive web design, you're fairly restricted because you're using the same code base. You can hack it, you can change it, and you can tweak it, but with things like adaptive web design, generally the speed is faster of the website because you're removing all the rest of the code, and you can do something a lot more bespoke and custom. I've also actually wrote an article about this topic on uxmagazine.com. So if you go onto UX Magazine under mobile strategies, I think that's where you can find the article which explores all of this in more detail. Okay, so I've got another presentation for you, which I'm presenting on Friday. So this presentation is it's about agile and lean user experience. It's in the context of user-centered design. So just quick hands up if any of you know what user-centered design is. Designing for the user. Nobody? Okay, there's one hand. Basically, just to give you a quick intro to user-centered design, it means designing with the user as a focal point, so you're involving users in the design process. You're not just going away and designing a game or designing a website or designing a software. You're actually designing with the user in mind, and you're involving the user in the design process. So you're not going away and making decisions with the clients or with other third parties. You're actually getting the user involved. So that's what this is about. So I'm going to probably have to skip through some of the slides because of time, but I'll sort of go into detail on some other slides. So is user-centered design enough today to deal with big IT projects? That's the first question. Why should we care about things like agile and lean? Basically, it's being adopted more and more. So if you go pretty much into any serious business now, developing a sort of a big website, a large software, even a game, people are working in agile and lean. Have any of you heard of agile before? Yes, so let's introduce you a bit to agile, and there's a few hands at the back over there. But obviously I'll introduce you to agile within the context of user-centered design, because obviously we're all sort of fairly creative here, so it's important for us to know this. Agile. When I say agile, one of the most popular forms of agile, there's obviously lots of different types of agile. There's extreme programming, there's quite a few, but Scrum is probably the most popular one. Have anyone heard of Scrum? Yeah, a few, again, same hands at the back. But Scrum is it's pretty much a project management philosophy now that's being used across pretty much any serious organisation now that I work with, where it puts individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So in that sense, it strips out a lot of documentation and things like that. It's working software is the most important thing. There's constant customer collaboration, which is good news because in the past, programmers and developers, they would go away and they wouldn't really interact with humans and people, so that's a good thing. And what Scrum allows you to do is respond to change. It's not just go away for 6 months, produce a big website or application, and not be able to be flexible. It allows the designers and developers to be 100% flexible to changes in the business or the product. So Agile is a lot of the time now replacing something called waterfall. Anyone heard of waterfall? So again, it's more of a classic process in designing software and websites where things are planned in months in advance, and then they go through a planning process, a design process, a programming process, and then there's user testing at the end. That's what waterfall is. The good thing about Agile is you can pick elements that you like. So it's not like a Bible that you have to follow every single law. You can pick and choose elements out of it that you like. So it's very much about, if you go onto the internet and read about Scrum, you can pick things that you like and just apply it to your project, which is great. One of the things that I like is about transparency. It's about getting everyone involved in the process and being open and honest with everyone, which is good. There's also various charting and points tools that you can use to see the progress and predict how long it's going to take you to do things. The concept of done is redefined. So when each of you probably created projects before, you said, yeah, I've finished the project, it's done. But actually the reality is it's probably not done. You'll go away, you'll find loads of bugs and loads of issues and loads of problems. So in Scrum, it's called done. That means that it's really done because it's been tested and validated and verified. I'll show you a quick diagram here. So this is essentially Scrum. One of the key things about Scrum is something called sprints, where you're sprinting, the team is sprinting, similar to in rugby. So everyone's running together and releasing an increment or a sprint. So sometimes, if you release one sprint, it can be a login screen. The second sprint could be like a browse function. The third sprint could be a homepage, with some sort of interface. So probably after you release 7 or 8 sprints, you're already in a position to have a product. And then there's a sprint backlog, and obviously there's quite a lot of detail which I won't be able to cover here. But you can just, if you can find this on Google, this diagram, if you're interested in this. So another reason to use Agile is technology. Because the technology is changing so fast, we've got Windows 8 tablets that came out last week. There's so many things going on at the moment. Agile encourages experimentation, and it encourages us to just get a couple of developers to create a quick sprint for a new piece of user interface for touch, for example. So because technology is changing so fast, if we're not sprinting quickly, working in agile teams, we can go away and build something over 6 months and it will be wrong. So that's a reason to use Agile. The other reason to use Agile is uncertainty, because obviously the fact is, if you look at this diagram, the discovery phase is always fuzzy. Everyone's all over the place. Obviously we can envision things and elaborate, and gradually we're becoming clearer, the focus is becoming better, and then we're developing, and as we evolve, we finally become more focused. So Agile helps to eliminate that. If we look at other industries like cars, for example, so they're using Agile in the sense that when they designed the Toyota Prius, for example, here, they actually so they created the shell of the car, and then they tried 80 different engines to see which one is going to be the best one. So again, it's taking a very agile approach here. They also tried 20 different suspensions and combined those with the different engines. Dozens of designs were submitted, and only two were selected and then iterated. So they were sprinted forward and continued to be tested. So you can see how Agile is being used in other industries besides computing. So the first tip with Agile is planning. Keep proposals as outlined. Don't go into too much detail in your specifications. And think in days. Don't think in months. Try and do all your investigations in a day, or in a couple of days. And think. Use things like how might we, which is sketches for ideas. How might we improve the security of the project? How might we make the game more playable? How might we? Because it's less leading. Instead of like what should we do, is how might we improve something for the end user. And obviously you can use Scrum to estimate what the minimal viable product will actually be, and we'll talk about the stories in a moment. The other thing that Agile allows you to do, and you probably can't read this from where you're sitting, but is a one-page business plan. So there's a great template online called a one-page business plan where you can put all your ideas for a business in one A4 sheet, which is really good. So it's got things in there like the suppliers, the partners, the key activities, the resources, the value proposition, the relationships, the channels, the cost structure, so what your costs for the project are going to be, how much money you're going to need to spend, and what revenue streams, are going to be like. Is it going to come from advertising, from freemium? So thinking in that instead of creating a 20 or 30 page business plan, you can create a one-page business plan, which is very helpful. And even if you do have a 20-page business plan, you can still summarize it into one page, which will really help. The Agile team is interested, especially within Scrum. So you've got someone called a Scrum Master, who they work in the teams. They're a designer or developer or programmer or whatever you want. So there's no project manager actually in the team. The team is managing itself, which is good. And then there's a product owner who is passing over the product backlog to the team. So the team is self-managed. You can have anything from 2 people to 10 people in the team, even more. Sprints are at the heart of Scrum. So you've got time-boxed sprints where normally a sprint is about 2 weeks. And every single sprint is potentially a product. The product owner is the voice of the customer, so the product owner is within the Scrum team, but he or she sit outside of the Scrum team. The other thing that you should be aware of is in Agile and Scrum, there's obviously a Scrum board. What that board is, it's lots and lots of to-do items which you can assign. Here we're using a tool called Trello, which is a brilliant project management tool. It's completely free to use. It's a really, if you're ever working on a collaborative project, you should definitely check out Trello. And essentially you've got a pipeline, you've got work in progress, you've got done, you've got tested. You can see all the columns over there. The other thing about Scrum is it encourages meetings. So you've got every week the team meet for a weekly kickoff meeting. Then they have a daily stand-up meeting. And they have daily workshops within the day as well, if they want. And they have weekly customer meetings. So every time you're working on an Agile project, you have to have at least one physical meeting with the clients, where you sit down with them and you go through things in detail. And then at the end of the week, the Scrum team get together and they show off or sort of showcase the project. The problems with Agile, the reality is lots of designers are scared of Agile. That's the reality. The reason why, one of the reasons is because Scrum has kind of come mainly from the IT or technology industry. So kind of designers have almost been put to one side. Now, however, there's a big movement of designers and Agile UX where the design team and the creative team are coming into the Agile teams and they're working as an essential part of the team. So whether you're a user experience designer, you're part of the team and you're involved. And the thing is with that is design in the past was seen as a bolt-on, whereas now it's seen as an essential component within Agile. So the successful companies are really emphasizing the design a lot more now. The other problem with Agile is it in the past it didn't contain marketing. So marketing was always hard to integrate marketing and Scrum together, because marketing is normally something that you have to plan in advance, whereas Scrum is much more at the moment. And the team is very rarely self-functioning. I've worked on quite a few Scrum projects, and sometimes you've had to bring sort of other managers to step in and manage the team. So it's not always an ideal solution. So sometimes you just have to use common sense. But depending on the team and the experience the team have, you can make Scrum work really well for you. The other sort of philosophy I want to explore quickly is something called Lean. So Lean is coming from something called the Lean Startup. Anyone here heard of the Lean Startup? Yes, it's basically there, one hand over there. There's a guy in sort of Silicon Valley called Eric Ries, and he's the one that sort of invented Lean, where he identified that most startups actually fail, but we can prevent failure very easily. And it's a brand new approach, and it's already being used, across many successful companies like Google and Apple, and also over here in the UK. So what is Lean? It's a management philosophy, really. Again, the roots come from Toyota, which they kind of invented lean manufacturing. So it comes actually from the manufacturing industry, but it heavily relies on evolving pivots. So, for example, you can go out there, release a game, release a product. There was one great example about a learning company. So they're teaching students online, but it wasn't working. The team were looking at the numbers and the data, and it just wasn't working. So obviously that's when you introduce a pivot. So you change the business or the product to be. Yeah, you just change it, and then you see what happens next. It's much more experimental. In fact, Lean is about experiments. There's other things within Lean to say you introduce automation, so you reduce errors by trying to automate tasks using things like libraries and various other things. In terms of the Lean process, so obviously this is a sort of diagram that explains what Lean is about in a nutshell. And it's all about learning, building, and measuring. So you've got to learn, build, measure. And it's pretty much common sense, really. So you've got your ideas, you've got your code, you've got your data, and you've just got to try and minimize that cycle to be successful. That's the key with Lean. So why use it? It is based on build, measure, and learn, which is pretty much experiments. It's heavily geared towards releasing an MVP, which is a minimal viable product. So that's the kind of a very important word now in the commercial world that I live in. Small teams, again, similar to Agile, similar to Scrum. Lean is about small teams working within an innovation sandbox. You've got big companies now like HP and lots of other ones, where they have lean teams working in a sandbox. So they're not disrupted by managers. They can do what they want. They've got total autonomy to do what they want. And all the decisions is based on actionable analytics. The whole purpose of Lean is to eliminate waste. I'm going to introduce you to some tips from Lean. So the first tip is about the MVP. So going to market with the minimum amount of features. That's what an MVP is. It's a minimal viable product. And that's a rapper called MVP, or a wrestler, not rapper. But yeah, you get the gist here. It's about creating something minimal, not trying to put all the bells and whistles in from day one. The other tip is innovation accounting. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but has anyone here heard of A/B testing, split testing? So when you launch a website now, you can release two versions of like Amazon. If you ever go onto Amazon, you'll notice the website changes very frequently. And in fact, what they're doing is they're experimenting on you. They're testing different versions of the page to see which one works better. So they'll take a sample of 1,000 users, create an experiment, and once they get the data back and they can see that that experiment is actually working better proportionally versus their other design, they'll stick with the one that works better. Facebook, again, they do it pretty much every day. They're experimenting on you without you even realizing it. Yeah, I mean, there's an example where one company released a sort of a lazy registration page where you don't actually have to register to use the service, and they thought, well, everyone assumes and thinks, they thought that this will increase the conversion rates and make the website more successful, but in fact it didn't make any difference. So they went away and luckily they did an experiment and they didn't invest too much time and money, and then they realized actually this isn't going to work, so we're lucky we've saved ourselves tens of thousands of pounds, let's spend that money on marketing instead. So it completely removes assumptions and allows practitioners like yourselves to focus on what works. This is innovation accounting, so it's I'm going to skip this one and skip that one. In terms of the Kanban board, this is another sort of agile style board. So it allows, so as you can see here, you've got a backlog, which is a list of things to do by the team. Then you've got work in progress. So here the team is obviously needs to work, is working on B and C at the moment, whereas the built column, the things that have already been built, and F is validated. But basically, as the B and C have been are in progress, but they're not ready to be moved into the built column until F is validated. So when I say validated, either it goes through an A/B test or it's tested with real customers in some sort of way. So essentially removes the pressure from the team to get loads and loads and loads of things developed. You have to validate one thing at a time in small batches before you can move forward. So small batches work faster. So when you're releasing things, don't release 20 features at once. Release things in small batches. So you can identify quality problems faster. And that's what Toyota do as well. So if they ever identify a problem in their manufacturing process, they stop the production line and try and find the problem, and don't continue to manufacture until they can find the quality problem. The same thing applies in web design, web development, game programming. If you find a problem, stop what you're doing, solve the problem, and then continue to develop. I think I mentioned this, but there's different. The main sort of big part of lean is something called pivot or preserve. So, and it's just about changing the products based on real world demand. So obviously there's loads of different types of pivots, which I'm not going to cover here. But you can, essentially there's something called like a zoom in pivot. So let's say you develop a particular website, let's say a website for concerts, for booking tickets, and you find that most of the features aren't being used, so you just remove those features and only focus on the features that are being used, like booking tickets, for example. Remove all the forums and community, and you just zoom in and focus, and that is your pivots. You've made the decision because you've realised that other things aren't working. That's when you introduce a pivot. And sometimes you can preserve, so if things are going very well on your project, you can just keep it as it is, and you can continue to make minor improvements. So the quick summary, so user-centered design, user experience, creativity is a critical component of Agile and Lean. So when you go out there tomorrow, you'll be working in Agile teams, and you'll be an important part of the team, and your voice is very, very important. Scrum is obviously different to Lean. It's two different philosophies, really. Scrum is more iterative, whereas Lean is more experimental. Sometimes neither is a solution to something. If you look at Google Buzz, I'm not sure if any of you remember that, that was Google's social network, and that was a product that sort of went through kind of a Lean MVP style release, and actually it didn't succeed. So it's not always Agile and Lean is not a guarantee to succeed by any means, but it does dramatically help to release things successfully. Gmail, for example, was developed using Scrum, so it was developed actually in a day by one of Google's engineers, and gradually improved, iterated and sprinted until it became, it was in beta for 2 years, so it's proof that it does work. Technology does influence design, so some people say that design comes before technology, but actually that is true in many respects, but technology does influence design. And the good thing about Scrum and Agile and Lean is you can pick things that you like from each sort of philosophy and apply them to how you work. And with Lean, they're saying that you have to be very strict and use the whole philosophy, or not use it at all. I would argue that you can use components of it depending on the project and the team and what you're doing. So thanks a lot. And if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to take on too.
So it's different models. How would you, if you're joining, how would you know what they explain to you?
Well, different companies use different. Some companies will use no model at all, if that makes sense. Some companies will use user-centered design. Some companies will use Scrum. Some companies will use Lean. Some companies might use an older project management philosophy like Prince too. So it just really depends on the type of company that you're joining. But before you join a company, you should ask them what sort of processes they use, because it is otherwise you might end up working in quite a chaotic agency or company. Like one person that I know was working in an agency where there were 2 people doing the same thing at the same time, so nobody actually knew what other people were doing. So, and that's obviously poor project management. So you have to make sure that they are using one of the frameworks. But yeah, you can also, as a new member of the team, introduce them to things like Scrum and Agile, and there are some very good courses as well that you can do. It's like a 2-day Scrum course I really recommend you can take as well in London. So yeah.
You get 2 different camps of people. You get the waterfall model people, and you've got Agile people, and quite often they don't believe you can blend those together. You're one of the few people who have said you can. Yeah. They do complement each other. I wonder if you could express something.
Well,
like
yeah.
that.
I mean, I think a lot of it's just because different. I think it can be blended in the sense that some people will go away and use components or part of the waterfall model to come up, let's say, with an advertising creative campaign where you'll have to go through the waterfall model, and then they'll use Scrum or Agile to just develop the software components. And sometimes you can do something in a waterfall over sort of 2 or 3 weeks, and then start the Scrum or Agile process afterwards. So the reality is when you're in a big organisation and there's like 10 or 20 projects going on, there's bound to be some elements of waterfall, because the truth is that still there's very few people out there that understand sort of really how it is and how it works. And sometimes it's not always the right answer either. It just depends. At least from my experience, sometimes you've got to go through a more extensive discovery or research phase, and only then start the Agile part later.
Also with Agile, you do have a lot more interaction with the client than you would with a traditional working model, whatever that model is. A lot of advertising agencies say you shouldn't have that interaction with the client. With your brand experience, where do you come with that?
Well, I think if you look at a company like Apple, for example, it doesn't really have, that's a good example. They don't like to do market research. They don't like to sit down and talk to customers. And I think they're an exception. There are a lot of PR companies out there and sort of creative companies that they just want to innovate, but most of them will probably just fail. I mean, I think with Apple, one of the good things about them is that they are users as well. So Steve Jobs always used to design, iPhones and iPads and computers for himself. He called himself a user. So I think obviously that is an exception.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thanks.